Yeah, I guess to backtrack is curious on what the final day at Surfer Magazine was like for everybody from the inside.
For me, it was a insane like 48 hours because basically 2 days before we had just endorsed Joe Biden for president because of environmental reasons, because of Donald Trump and his administration rolling back environmental rules and installing people who were friendly to the fossil fuel industry at the head of the EPA and the Department of the Interior, which is really important stuff that surfers should care about. And so, like, that's the reason why, we were going out on that limb for the first time in the magazine's 60-year history.
Yeah.
And the fallout from that was tremendous. Like, there was like a lot of people who were like hell yeah, like protect our coasts. But then there was like literally thousands of people who were commenting with like, you know, allusions to conspiracy theories and just like super negative stuff. And so that was just like a crazy experience to just like kind of like witness that happening like on our social channels for like 2 days. And so I was kind of like fried. We got a campsite at San Alejo, like me and my girlfriend. And so I was already at San Alejo, had just like taken kind of like a half day and was like about to go surfing. And then like I get this text and it's like, you need to be on this call in like an hour. And I was like, I looked at the other people on the text and I was like, oh, like this can only mean that there's like something bad is happening.
No.
Yeah,
Oh fuck.
because anyone who's like been in media, like as long as me and Grant have seen like layoffs happen, because that's just like the nature of media. Like it's just a very tough business right now. And so it's like we kind of knew what was going down. I was very glad to be in San Alejo because like as soon as we got the news, like I just like went surfing.
Just to juxtapose the positioning of it, like, hey, it's all done. You're like, great, I'm gonna wax my board out then.
I was like, I'm in the perfect position to take this news right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a call, and there was like a bunch of people on that call from Surfer, but also like the other titles that got shut down. And yeah, it was basically they just kind of like told us they're just like, this is like the last day. Like some people were like kind of emotional. Like most of us like are like, we knew this day was gonna come. We just didn't know it was gonna be, you know, Friday, October 2nd.
Yeah. It's pretty gnarly though. The outpour of people that wrote. I mean, we experienced it from the outside, and it's crazy to see like people posting all their cover shots, the stories they loved, and like Transworld went away first, surfing second, but Surfer, like the lineage of Surfer, for it to close is it's like a state of where surf media is now. I would say like, or do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like the kind of things that have been changing in the media ecosystem since like the late 2000s are like manifesting, in different ways in different times. Like there were so many like local newspapers, for example, that were like going out of business in like, the early 2010s.
Yeah.
And then like for some reason, like the surf industry was like maybe a little bit insulated from that at first. But like what's ended up affecting like all publishers equally, surf industry or not, is just basically like advertiser revenue is going towards, like Facebook, Google ads, like these like performance marketing avenues instead of going directly to publishers. And so it's like everyone's like fighting for like a shrinking piece of the pie. It was
Yeah.
like it was basically between like us and Stab, and it was just like there just wasn't a healthy industry to like support it, first of all, because like the surf industry isn't like killing it like it was before.
Yeah.
And then also just like they have so many other ways to spend their money than they like used to be able to.
On the opposite note with Grant, because you're working now currently at Surface Journal, are you guys seeing a rise in subscriptions at all, or is it a fall?
So yeah, I'm pretty new there, so but it sounds like right now there's like a little boost in subscriptions. Things are like on the upswing, and I think that's due to the fact that obviously people still want to consume surf media, like they want to have that form of escapism and like experience the world, and I think you get that so differently in a magazine than you do on Instagram. I think it's like really like starts to get really repetitive on Instagram, and like the magazine kind of gives you like a break from that repetitive nature of like social media and that. So I think people are still going to go there, and I don't know, I don't think the uptick in subscriptions at the Journal are anything related to Surfer magazine. I just think it's like the time that we're living in. Maybe people have a bit more time to read. Maybe they are thinking about those things more now. Like, I mean, I don't know, there's many reasons why that could be the case, you know, some sort of nostalgia for the magazine or whatever. People are trying to hold on to that while they can. But yeah, I mean, it seems to be going pretty well. So
It's trippy. I feel like with COVID coming in, when everybody really stopped, that first wave of COVID, it was almost like this nostalgic thing of like, why do I like surfing? And then there's been like, we've been talking, I mean, even through Channel Island streams, it's like hardboard sales are good and growing. People are wanting to surf and hit
Everyone's
the water.
surfing right now.
So it's an interesting time. I was curious for you guys, like the effects of COVID working in magazines, like was there positives and negatives to that? Or was it just
I mean,
one?
that's something you can speak to more than me, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's funny, you know, like in the last issue, you know, Sean Doherty wrote this piece called The End Times for Pro Surfing that was basically about like the history of the WSL, you know, and going back to just like the early history of professional surfing in general, and kind of how it's had these booms and busts over time, and how like right now it's like interesting that more people are paddling out and surfing than ever in the history of the activity, and yet, you know, it's like the WSL can't really turn a profit. Like a lot of like surf companies are struggling, and I think it just kind of speaks to the fact that like I don't know, I think there needs to be like huge changes in the industry and like in like the way that people like talk to surfers, you know, in like a way that's more genuine and not just like trying to like sell them something that like they're not necessarily able to relate to or like want to buy, you know?
So what are you saying? Like people talking to surfers, is that companies talking to people who just are surfing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have a theory on that a little bit. Like, I mean, being a little bit older and seeing sort of the like mid 80s, 90s kind of surfing was an alternative thing that you did. You were a surfer. It was your way of sort of separating yourself from like the jocks at school.
It's counterculture.
Counterculture, yeah. And I think what's happened is surfing is so great and it was popularized so much over that period that there was like a boom period through like maybe the mid 2000s. Because I know in the mid 2000s, Surfer Magazine made 2 years running like the biggest surf magazine ever made. In the big issue, it was like almost 400 pages, I think. Like they were huge, you know. So that was probably like the peak boom period where everyone was noticing surfing. You know, you had Kelly Slater, you had all these elements that kind of like pushed it to the mainstream. And so now, what is it, 15 years later, that next generation kind of like maybe through their parents or whatever it is, kind of got pushed into surfing by that like energy or whatever. And now you have not necessarily people that are surfers, but they love surfing and they're not like looking at the WSL to get inspiration or like the best, gnarliest pro surfer to get inspiration. They're just kind of like, I want to get this board, I want to go ride a wave, you know, instead of going mountain biking or kayaking or whatever it is, you know, and so there's sort of there's a disconnect between the industry and surfing as a culture now. You know, it's changed so much. You know, there still is this weird sort of counterculture element in like professional surfing and like athlete and kid who like wants to be on a world tour or whatever it is. But I think that's sort of like this little nucleus inside of something that's so much bigger now, you know.
I think it's like also like the commercialism, like the rampant commercialism.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you look at like the WSL and like they run ads where it's like, you know, I surf the road, I surf adventure, and it's like a Jeep going over, and you're like, what the hell is that? Who is that for?
Yeah.
You know, because I think it's like that alienates actual surfers who have like lived and breathed this shit their whole lives.
Yeah.
And then like new surfers are probably just kind of like confused by that. Like I don't think anyone's like seeing that and they're like, oh, I'm gonna buy a Jeep. God, I love the WSL.
Yeah.
You know, like.
But is
like,
it a burden? I would say, is it a burden to work behind a magazine, especially one like Surfer? Specifically for you, Todd, at the final end there, surfing's getting ripped, like you guys are saying, in so many different directions, and you're celebrating the ethos of John Severson and how it started, which is that idea getting smaller? Like you were saying, kids are coming in like, oh, I just surf. It's almost the same as I kayak or whatever. And WSL is throwing a Jeep ad. And it's like you guys are still celebrating like escapism, like adventure, like surf, do it for the pure love of it. Was it a burden to be telling that story as it's getting smaller, or is it getting smaller? Or like, what was that like?
Honestly, like, this is going to sound crazy, but like, I feel like the more advertisers dropped out, like the freer it felt to make, because you're just kind of like, well, like, you know, we can be like critical of these like systems in surfing that like maybe alienate people, you know? And like, I felt like the last couple issues were like some of my favorite to make, weirdly. Like, and like the very last issue is probably like the proudest I've ever been of like a magazine that we've put out. And that was, you know, that talked about, you know, what's happening in pro surfing and like kind of the alienation of like the surfing masses. It talked about, you know, the history of the LGBTQ plus like surf community, and what they've kind of gone through, and kind of the people who are like blazing this new path forward, and you know, the Black Surfing Association in New York and kind of what they're doing in regards to the racial justice movement and organizing these paddle outs. And yeah, it's just like, I don't know. I feel like we had previously, you know, kind of gone towards just always covering like pro surfing and always covering this like super small segment of it that like whether we, you know, whether it was like overt pressure or just kind of like internal bias of like what surfers should cover. Like, I feel like towards the end, we kind of escaped that a little bit. And we're telling more stories that, I don't know, I feel like connected more to real surfers.
It's really interesting if you go on the Surfer website right now, because a lot of those articles, full articles, are there for the reading, which I thought was interesting because I saw the way that your Biden post, I don't know, that was you then who posted that on Surfer to say like, hey, we're backing this presidential nomination, and the way that it reacted on social versus the long format. I mean, it's a bit, there's more gray area within your long format piece, which is like you're trying to, you know, tell people about the environmentalism aspect of what you're saying. And then that Twitter size statement on Surfer was just like hot fire, which was like, you know what I mean? It was like so many people like, this is dividing us. And it was just really interesting to see how like two platforms with a message that's obviously the same but written slightly different can react so differently.
Yeah, well, I think that like I would bet that 90% of the people who commented on the Instagram post didn't actually read the story.
Well, I read the story because of the Instagram post. I don't know if I would have if I wasn't going like, holy shit, like this thing is like off the rails in every direction. Like I gotta see what actually this means.
Yeah.
And then but I mean I wonder, is that happening a lot nowadays with just humanity? Is like we're searching for smaller, easier to digest information, which gives you less time to truly understand issues.
Well, yeah, it's like how Twitter was considering putting a label on retweets if the person didn't actually click the link to open the article, because so many people are just sharing headlines and no one's actually like reading and like putting it in the context of like, okay, what does this actually mean? It's like, does this headline agree with my worldview? Cool, I'm going to share it, you know, without like clicking and reading the details and seeing like, you know, what it actually means. And I mean, yeah, it's like, that's why people are like so misinformed on like so many issues right now, you know? And it's like, it's not even their fault. It's like that's these like social media platforms have just been like designed to encourage this, you know?
It's definitely a thing that just, it's like a system, you know, it's like it's a mirroring effect. It's like, oh, I'm kind of into these things. And all of a sudden it starts popping up in your feed and you're like, oh, I'm reading this. This is interesting. And then you get deeper into these vortexes of like, what's the truth behind an issue? It's like more exhausting to get your information now because you have to read both sides to kind of like then make your gray area. At least with the news aspect, I feel a little bit. That's outside of surfing, obviously, because there's not a lot of like crazy different viewpoints in surfing, right? It's not like you have one side that's like psycho and another side that's psycho in a different direction.
Well, I would say that there have been very rare instances lately where there's been overlap there. But like with like, you know, Tyler Wright, you know, putting Black Lives Matter on her board and the reactions to that and like the different ways that that was talked about in the surf media ecosystem. And that was like, everyone was commenting with like, you know, different facts or different conspiracy theories or different, and it was just like the Wild West, you know,
Yeah.
like what you said. It was just like a dumpster fire of a comment section,
Whoa,
and you're just like, how is this happening? Like, how is it that we can't like agree on like a basis for reality, you know, which is just fundamentally like new. I don't think that's ever happened before.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask you guys, because I mean, Grant, specifically to you, you've worked within media for so long, and like major changes since the internet came around, social media came around, and you can keep it just into surf, but like
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to take it into politics, but like just in my experience with surfer, I mean, I came into it at like a time that was really strange because it had this like golden era of film photography, no internet. I mean, literally no internet at all. Everything you consumed about surfing was in a surf magazine. I mean, growing up in South Africa, it was even hard to just get the latest like videos, you know, like the latest VHSs. Like to get the Taylor Steele stuff was difficult, you know, and like it got easier and easier like as I kind of got older. But like in the beginning, it was like almost impossible. You know, we were getting like copies of copies of copies that were like color films in black and white because you couldn't even see the colors of the boards or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Then I get into Surfer Magazine, and it's like this film era where everyone's traveling around the world shooting film, sending it into the magazines. It gets processed. There's like, you're kind of enjoying the experience plus making money because it's all kind of happening in this like confined space. And then digital photography came along, and all of a sudden you were working after hours to like get your photos out there, and it took people a long time to transition. And sort of I came in right in that window, so I was dealing with the sort of old school way and the new way, and the new way was very new and like difficult to maneuver. And it slowly kind of like the digital sort of took over, and that really started to affect the inside crew's perception on the magazine, because they felt like they had lost grip of this thing that was precious to them and their thing, you know, and like all of a sudden it kind of like let it open up one notch further into the world. Like some kid in another country, if he was on it with the digital thing, could like shoot something and send it to you, and he would have been like it would have been way more difficult for him to break that barrier prior to that, you know?
Yeah, I wonder how he actually went.
And you can see now, I mean, that was the very beginning of it. Now it's like escalated into like, you know, people can get a good shot on their iPhone and get it published if they're in the right place at the right time kind of thing. So it really took this like precious thing away from these people that had kind of had it and controlled it for a long time. And like navigating that was very difficult and like a very sort of intense experience, you know, because I was pretty green and like I just kind of got thrown in the deep end with that. And so like when I look back on it, like how big of a transition it was, like to be thrown into, like just in the sort of internal politics of it and all
Is that like when you're talking about a crew that was shooting film, is that like a Divine era?
Oh, I mean, well, from day one it was on film.
Yeah.
Up until say 1999, 2000. Everything was on film before that. Yeah. So it was every era, you know, from day one. But I mean, I think like I've always just approached it with like a love for surfing. That's why I'm there. I kind of try to let all that stuff sort of brush off your shoulders, but it gets to you sometimes, you know, because there's a lot of like that intense. I don't know if it's like more so on the photo side, because it's like this kind of gives you like a little badge of honor if you get your photo in the magazine, you know, and whereas like with the writing side of things, people like it's either the edit staff that's working with writers, and then you know, there's a relationship there because you're going back and forth a lot and it's like a smaller group, but with photography it's like it's really a difficult like group to manage, you know.
I think it's also like probably way more competitive, right? Because like
yeah.
You got way more photographers submitting way more stuff than we were getting pitches on writing. Yeah. And like pitches on writing, it's like you kind of like you know, you kind of know immediately when you read a pitch, you're like, this is going to be a hell of a story.
Yeah.
Versus like, you know, like someone who's just like, oh, I want to talk about my surf trip with my friend. And you're like, okay, we're probably not going to publish that.
But let me ask this question to both of you guys, but in different avenues, is working at the magazine, like I remember growing up, it was like such a privilege to get, you were like, what, Eichner? I'm going to go on a trip with Eichner right now? Like, are you seeing photographers come up the way that like the ranks, like, okay, like these guys are, this is your A-list guys, and then there's young guys aspiring to be these guys, and the same in writing, like long format written word about surf, is it becoming endangered now because there's so much availability to write whatever you want? Or is there still really talented young people coming up?
You want to go first on the photo side?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely people with talent. I mean, people are getting better and better and better at photography. Like, obviously, with Instagram, I think that I saw sort of an era where I really started noticing it was like the GoPro thing. Like, kids that maybe used to start their lives out in the ocean on a boogie board, like pulling into barrels on the shore break, were now taking a pair of swim fins and a GoPro and taking photos for their Instagram accounts of empty waves. So they're getting like this like step into photography early. I mean, I had multiple emails from parents of like 13, 14-year-old kids who got a couple good surf shots, and like all of a sudden they were like trying to get us to publish them and stuff like that, which is fine. And if they got a good photo, they had every right to
rad.
have that
You
photo
should really
published, you know? I've always taken the approach that like I'm just trying my hardest to look just at the photos, you know? Like I'm not looking at the names. So, and obviously you develop relationships with people, and that gives them an advantage and whatnot. And that's just natural for any business, you know? But so, yeah, there's still people coming up that have talent. You still see them. And I mean, it's like you almost have to sometimes like remove all the noise, you know, and hope that like, it's harder almost now for that sort of super talented person to like break out because there's so much noise out there, you know, and you can be great at marketing yourself, but not necessarily the best photographer. And then like someone that's really good at photography and is like really on it and might have a harder time to like get over that hump, you know,
To be noticed.
because they're just focusing on that one thing and they don't have the skills for the other stuff, you know. So yeah, I mean, there's so many good photographers out there, right? I mean, almost every town has good photographers now, you know. So it's like it's a way more challenging thing. I mean, I have a hard time encouraging people to become surf photographers because it's like, I can't see, you know, you have to be so dedicated and have so many relationships and be in the right place at the right time all the time to like eke out a living as a surf photographer, you know. I mean, let's put it this way. We went from when I started at Surfer,
Which
we
was what
had
year?
2003. I'm guessing here, but I'm probably right in the ballpark of about 15 people on retainer. So they were paid monthly, and there was a range of salaries. They would also get film when they traveled, and that film would be paid, the processing would be paid for them, you know. So like, let's say a Tom Survey or a, you know, Jason Kenworthy or one of those types of characters who were shooting a lot and doing really big trips with like A-list surfers would get 40 to 60 rolls of film for a trip. If they wanted to add to that, they could, sometimes even more. We would pay for the processing. I forget what that cost, you know, like maybe $8, $10 a pop. So like, that's like getting close to $1,000 just on its own.
Yeah.
To one retainer photographer left by the end,
Wow.
no film budget, pay for all your digital equipment on your own, all your hard drives on your own, you know, and very small travel budget that like kind of you still, you know, some of them, like the one retainer photographer that we had also had relationships with brands and stuff like that. So we're almost piggybacking on the back of some of that stuff because we can't afford to pay for every trip, you know. I mean, I think we've paid for very few actually, probably, to get the imagery, you know. Like you can give them something towards a Hawaii trip where you know you're going to gather like a lot of content that you can use in a lot of different places, that kind of thing. But that's how much of a giant change happened in that era. And you're still expected to like be operating at the same level that you were then, now, you know, and like that's the gold standard of being in that position, you know. And it's
Actually, really
same thing as an editor. That's what people in maybe just in the industry, the outsider doesn't know this stuff, but in the industry, that's what the industry knows. You know, it's very like internalized. Like everyone kind of is in those businesses and grow up in the surf community, like doing events or whatever. Those are the people that you're going to hear from the most and like be around the most. They still see it that way, you know, and no one ever probably looked at that other side of it, you know. So
the outside factors.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to like talk negatively about it. Like the magazine just adapted to that stuff, you know. You just have to manage your relationships with people and like help them to sort of understand where.
Well, it's cool, like you're saying, Todd. Like the last couple of issues, you actually were the most proud of, right? Like no matter what was happening, at least the story, the quality of within the magazine was still at the level that you were stoked on.
Yeah. I mean, it's like so many things have changed in the time that, you know, I was at Surfer for 10 years, and like when I started at Surfer, I think like we had just started like an Instagram page.
Yes.
And like
I don't even think we really knew what it was, and didn't. I think in the beginning we didn't actually put that much energy towards it because it didn't seem that much of a big
everyone
deal.
was like,
It's
is
clunky.
this gonna matter?
Like, it was just like, is this something?
Everyone's like doubting it. It's like, is Instagram gonna matter? Does anyone care?
Like, should we triple filter this coffee shot right now?
Yeah, should we put the filter with the little frayed edges on it?
Yes.
But yeah, it's just like so funny to think that like these things that were just kind of like, you know, like some fringe element or what we thought was like a fringe element ended up being like kind of like the main thing through which people consume Surfer is like through social media.
Yeah.
And then it's like we continued to put so much effort into the magazine because like it really was more than anything, it was like this total passion project where it was like, you know, blood, sweat, and tears into every issue. Because you know that like the Instagram post is going to come and go. There's going to be a new one tomorrow. This magazine is going to exist in a physical form in someone's bookcase or coffee table or wherever for, you know, years and years and years. And so it's like, you know, you want that thing to be perfect. And so like, yeah, it just became like a very difficult ecosystem for, you know, for contributors especially. And, you know, like what Grant was talking about with photos, you know, it's like the same thing was happening on the Word side where it was like, you know, when you had Trans World shut down and then surfing shut down and then Surfer go from 12 issues to 8 issues to 4 issues. It's like, you know, all these super, super talented writers are like looking at the writing on the wall and they're like, well, I need to do something else for a living because there's just not enough opportunities to get my writing published.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna. That's a good point. Is like the real estate shrank. You know what I mean?
Just by issue
But
basis. is what you're saying.
but the group of people that kind of almost expected to contribute to that. You know, they put their whole life into working at Surfing magazine or Trans World magazine. They've shot covers and features and yeah, they expect to keep doing that, you know. So like they come and then it's like your pool is bigger and you're trying to manage those relationships and keep everyone happy or try to keep everyone happy. That even happened with the surfers, you know. There were surfers that were dedicated to Trans World or to Surfing magazine that were like diehard and grinding that way. They had to come and try to fit into that. And as that was happening, the magazine was reducing. And then that allowed people to go out on their own and start producing stuff. And that's probably how like vlogging and the YouTube thing kind of, that was probably a later iteration of it. But then, you know, you got your Instagram accounts going and all these kind of things started happening and it started trickling outward too. which then is another factor that affects the magazine, you know. So we had so many things like happening all at the same time. You don't really realize it almost when you're in it, like that all of this is really going on around you. You're just like, okay, let's get this magazine done, you know, like try to like manage everyone that's coming at you. Only looking at it now do I kind of realize just like what was really happening from the outside perspective, you know. And so there was a lot of challenges, I mean, doing that. But I mean, I'm so grateful for having that job. It's like, it was fun too, you know. I kind of feel like we headed down a negative path there.
Which I mean, it's just true though. Yeah. You know, we're talking honestly about like a difficult subject, which is media in 2020 and the last 10 years. But you know, like I'll say that, you know, I'm super stoked that you're kind of carrying the torch at the Journal and like what the Journal's doing, because I feel like the Journal represents this like more grassroots like approach to media. And like considering the fact that, you know, like when these outlets close down and then you don't have people funding, you know, like actual like journalism and people like going to places and like, you know, writing beautiful travelogues and like, you know, really painting like a beautiful picture of a place or of a surfer or of some aspect of the culture, you know, when the outlets disappear and that goes away with it, that's a huge loss to the culture.
Yeah.
But Surfer's Journal still does that, like cover to cover every issue. And like, I think it's really important for people to know that like you have to support these things if you want them to like continue.
I wanted to bring up the example of, because I'm a fan of modern media because it's you can take control, and like you were saying, the vlog stuff, it is because it was becoming more limited space within the magazines. And to be a surfer, you had to share your story, share your journey. So it's cool because it's free, you can do whatever you want and literally make it look whatever you want. But the pieces that I think, and you're hitting that note, Todd, is we all did that trip to Jamaica where we went down to document the Wilmot family, right? Like, and just kind of give a little what's up on the Kingston surf community. And I wonder nowadays, like, if those areas where there was phenomenal surfing going on in our personal life, we came back from that trip and then created the board drives that then kind of like gave me this whole new energy and way to look at surfing in general. But it's like, if we didn't have the excuse as a magazine to go down to do that trip with no other purpose than to be there and surf with those guys, I wonder what the future looks like for those emerging surf communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely these sort of hidden effects that it's going to have. I just don't think, like, it's like any advertising, you know, if you're not advertising something and putting it out to the world, like, I mean, some things get around through word of mouth, but like some part of it's going to fade, you know, like some aspect of it is going to fade or be affected by this happening. I don't think that it like lives on in the same format, and those little moments might not happen as easily, and they probably will still happen because of people have had this opportunity now to like push out and do their own things, and you have guys like Jamie O'Brien, who's like channel's getting huge, and that's kind of almost becoming its own little media platform and growing into something bigger, you know, and so those moments will happen, but it'll be like individuals that'll kind of control it. It won't allow someone like you who maybe didn't have an idea about this issue, and someone that might have made a difference might not get that opportunity now, you know. I mean, that's very specific, but
yeah, I like it though. But I mean, that's a great point, is to like talk that out, that issue of personal control of your self-image versus like a publication helping guide surf culture.
Yeah, and I mean, I look at it like, just, you know, obviously I can't speak for kids now and Instagram and all that stuff, but like when I was a kid, I mean, I consumed Surfer Magazine from like an early age, and it was a very difficult thing to get in my community. Like there was one issue a month that would come to a newsstand, and like if you weren't there to get it, and I don't even think anyone in my town wanted to pay for it because it was too expensive because it was coming so far.
They're just
So
passing
I
it
was
around.
like,
Share a copy.
yeah, like I would be the one that would go and buy it because I was like, I have to have this thing, you know. And so I would buy it, and
Such a good friend.
I always,
the team.
yeah, like I always kind of leaned towards Surfer, you know. There were some months like, I mean, I won't lie, like there's some months where like I was such a big Aki fan or whatever, like that if he had a good shot in Surfing magazine that I'd buy Surfing. But then I would normally go back and buy Surfer at a later point after I'd like sort of begged for more money from the family like to get the other one because I really wanted Surfer. And so that was kind of like the beginning of my relationship, and I consumed the whole thing. I mean, I'm from South Africa, and I was reading like the ESA like contest results, you know, like
So
every
Keep
word,
on
you know.
Florida amateur events, like
Yeah, and then I would hand it out at school to all my friends, and like we would check it out, and like, you know, put all the pictures all over your wall, whatever. So that's kind of how I started with it, and then, you know, I mean, that relationship kind of like grew into this job, you know, and like I look back on it, and it's such a trip. Like my whole career has been like working for this magazine that I used to read as a kid, and now that's gone away completely, you know, and like I haven't really like focused on anything else in my life. Like it's just all been this thing, and it kind of makes you nervous. You're like, oh, have I painted myself into a corner kind of thing, you know, a little bit. But like, I mean, all the experiences that I've had and the knowledge that I've gained from just doing that is like obviously going to allow for many opportunities, you know.
and you lived good. Like, I mean, that's what it's all
Yeah,
about.
what was, I want to hear some trip stories. Like, what was
Yeah.
your first trip for the magazine?
I know.
For the magazine, I can't even probably remember. One of the first ones I remember was an amazing trip. I don't know if it was the first, but it was an early trip to Nicaragua with Corey Lopez. And it was kind of, I think like I would end up with these trips that they weren't like the A trips. Like, you know, it's like you're in the magazine, so you kind of like, you don't want to snag. The era that I was in, there was so many of these like A grade photographers around, so they're getting all these good trips still, you know, and I was like just picking up scraps, and this was like a trip that Corey was going on with his buddies from Florida to Nicaragua, and it just so happened Chris Ward was going.
That would be his buddy
And-
for sure.
No, I mean Chris was staying with his girlfriend and Joe Alani in a condo, and then Corey and his whole crew were staying at Mark and Dave's. And there was no room because there were like 12 of them. So I was in this apartment with Wardo and his girlfriend and Joe, but they were doing their own thing. So Corey would be like out front at 5 o'clock in the morning, pick me up, and then Chris and his crew would disappear for the day, and we wouldn't see them. And then we would go and do our thing. And then I would get back to the house at like 11 at night, and they would roll in after me. And then they had this little like early digital like point and shoot camera, and they would start flipping through photos of their day. And our day was like chase the tide from this spot to this spot, like get in the car. If you're not in the car with Corey, like he'll leave you behind kind of thing.
Corey's the man.
Yeah, and he is so on it. And then Wardo's pictures are like them like hiking through rivers and like in these bars with like monkeys and like all this kind of
And you're
weird
staying
like
with them, so you're like, what?
yeah, like they're having this like crazy like wild adventure every day, and I'm seeing it on these pictures, and then and not that like we weren't having a good time, but I was just like, how are these people getting into this stuff in one day? Like the stuff that was going on was wild. And then the biggest day of the swell, we show up, we pull into the parking lot, and I mean like they're partying and carrying on, you know, like we pull in the parking lot, we walk out, and we see this like 10-foot like barreling left, like rolling across the sandbar. The thing like spits and water comes out of the barrel. Like he, after doing all this crazy stuff, like still like somehow got in the water and beat us out to like the spot and was getting like insane waves. And it was just like this insane experience, you know, like it was just like kind of a wild like trip like between those two guys. Like it was like getting thrown in the deep end, you know.
Those guys are the best though, because they are on it, like Corey specifically, on it all day.
Yeah,
like he'd be like,
and I
oh,
feel
sun
like-
up, sun down, we're still getting it, like we'll find another spot.
Oh
Let's
yeah,
go.
it was awesome. I mean, he's a epic dude to travel with, you know, like I mean, I'd done a lot of traveling prior to that on the world tour and all that, like traveling around with the world tour, and had like many like cool adventures and wild adventures doing that, you know. But within Surfer, that was kind of one of my first little like missions, and it was just such a trippy one to go on, like for the first one, you know.
How about for you, Todd?
My first trip for Surfer was to India in early 2011.
Is that the one that Warren Smith?
Warren Smith
got
was
the
on the
cover.
cover. Yeah.
Whoa,
He's like
yes.
pointing at this like perfect
Yes.
little left, and there's like crows on the beach, and it's like, you know, you see these boats. It's like kind of trippy looking. But yeah, so that trip was like, I think it was like Lewis Samuels was supposed to go on the trip to write something about Craig Anderson, and then he like broke his arm or something. And so like Brendan Thomas, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, he was like, yeah, you go. And like, I was so green. You know, I'd been there for like 6 months or something. And, you know, next thing I know, I'm like jumping on a plane, like to the other side of the planet to meet up with, it was Chris Burkhardt was shooting photos. And then it was Craig Anderson, Warren Smith, Dylan Perillo. I think there was like a couple other folks, but yeah, it was like just the craziest trip because, we flew into this one like super small like kind of like beach town where there's this like lighthouse and just kind of this like funky closed out wave. But then like, you know, we heard about this like river mouth wave that could be sick, you know, like no idea, drove over there, and it ended up being this kind of like roping left that like, you know, Warren and Ando were just like throwing like huge alley-oops and like sticking crazy airs. And like there's these dudes who are like walking like down the beach who've just like, I don't know, maybe they've like never even seen like surfing before, and they're just like standing and they're just like tripping out, and they were like hauling out their daily catch of fish like every morning we surfed there. And it was like insane. Like we're talking like 50 dudes just like yanking these like super huge ropes and like these giant nets with like hundreds of fish like out of the ocean like every morning. And it was like, clearly it was like the whole town got together to do this like every day. And we're like surfing, like watching this go down, and we're like,
That's a straight
like,
end of
dude.
summer moment right there.
oh yeah. And like we ended up like going to this like this other place, I think it was Kanyakumari, and it's like the southernmost tip of India. And like we like took a ferry across to this like giant like statue of this like famous Swami, and like there's this area in front of the statue where like 3 currents like converge, and like you could see like there's 3 different colors of water. And like I was just like the whole trip I was like pinching myself. I was like, what is my job? Like this is insane.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna just like go home and like write about this. And you know, it was funny though. It was like some hard traveling. Like, you know, we stayed in like hotels where it was like, you know, there was like 1 bed and there was like 6 of us, and like so a bunch of us were like either spooning on the bed or like asleep on the ground, but there was like a leak in the bathroom, so the ground was wet. And it's just like, I don't know, there's so many trips like that, and it's
Yeah.
just like you just kind of roll with it, and like, you know, you just like smile and you're just like, you know, it's like totally worth it, of course, in the end. But
What about
yeah.
the food? I heard sometimes, like, I've never been to India. I really want to go, but I heard the food was.
A story that I remember from that trip that you told, which is to this day blows my mind, was Dylan Perillo. They went into a restaurant, and I just still to this day can't believe this happened, but they went into a restaurant and there was a water
It was a
jug,
yeah,
and a
little
basin.
for washing your hands before you eat.
and he thought it was the drinking water and filled a cup and drank like a cup of it.
Yeah,
Or-
well he
No,
So-
a death
so-
sentence.
yeah,
and
so
he nearly killed himself, I think.
Ando watched him pouring a cup of this, and he was like about to drink it, and then Ando like puts his hand up. He's like, "Dude, don't drink that." He's like, "That's the hand washing water. Like, who knows how long it's been on this table?" Like,
For sure.
And Dylan was like, "Dude, I've already had like 3 glasses."
Oh no!
And so it was insane. And so then it was almost just like countdown to
Oh,
food
yeah.
poisoning. And so like sure enough, it was like maybe like a couple hours later, it's like Dylan was like, I'm not feeling good. And so then like, and through the course of the trip, everyone on the trip ended up getting sick. Cause I just don't think that like, the microbes, like we're just not used to like those things. And so it was like, he was getting so sick that he was like ghost faced. His like lips were like blue. Like we were like starting to stress out. We're like, we probably need to like get him to a hospital or something. And he was downplaying it. He was kind of being a champ. He was like, oh, it's fine. But there'd be times where we'd be like checking out of one hotel and we'd be like going to surf all day before checking into another. So he would have to like come with us. And I remember it was like, we had watched people this whole trip, like in a lot of these coastal villages, the people will just like, they'll just like walk out to the beach, dig a little hole and like, drop a deuce and fill in the hole and go back to whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like the way they did it. And, like Dylan got so sick that like I remember one time he like jumped out of the van, ran down to the beach and dug a hole and dropped one. And like, yeah. And we were like, oh, he's like a man of the people, like good on him.
Blending in, you're blending in.
Yeah, you're assimilating. But yeah, it was crazy. We ended up like, he was sick through the end of the trip and like literally got on the plane. And I think he went like straight to the doctor like after he was fine.
Himself into a hospital when he got home or something.
I think he did. Yeah, he went to the ER or something. He was, he's okay. But dude, that was so gnarly.
Oh yeah.
Very touch and go.
But to speak to the flip side of all of that too is like when you're in the office and it was pretty demanding. Like there was a time there where we were making 12 issues a year plus doing Hot 100 plus like the big issue plus like we did a couple years we did a girls magazine like Salted, and there were other like when it was really busy there were all these other like projects that you were working on as well, so it was extremely busy and you would get all this content back from these like exotic locations, and like, I mean, that's kind of why you get the job at Surfer Magazine. You're not getting a lot of money. You're hoping to be able to travel and experience this type of stuff. And so to like add to the layer of like toughness of the job is you're seeing this stuff come back and you're like, I want to be there.
Yeah, like, wait, why am I not on this trip? Yeah. Like, I gotta go on more of these trips.
So, like, it's like almost like creates like another layer of like stress for you,
Some
like on top of the job.
layer.
Yeah, like it's crazy. Like, it definitely like has an effect at times where you're just like, oh my god.
Yeah, but
like,
Grant, you scored so many sick
I know.
trips.
I was gonna just say, I've been on a couple of movies.
I'm never complaining about it, but you got to look at it like this. Like, you do 2 trips or 3 trips a year, and then you're seeing 5, 6 of these things every month.
Yeah,
like there's a lot, and it's like you definitely do score, and you definitely do get your fill of that stuff. But we all love surfing and want to be in these places, so like that's kind of like your whole goal in life, and so you're just like consuming that. So it's like you're almost torturing yourself a little bit by having that job,
Well, but one last thing on this point is that like, it's funny because like towards the end, like we've been talking about, like because of just the media ecosystem, it did get really hard and strenuous to do these jobs. But then, you would still get to go on these trips sometimes. And like, I mean, the best waves I ever scored in my entire life was last year with Grant when we went on that trip to mainland Mexico with John Rose and Ben Bourgeois, and it was like
the most mellow trip.
It was like we ended up like going to this wave that we like thought was gonna be like less crowded, but like like not as good as some of like the better known spots. And it's like it was like we showed up and like we were just like, what the hell is this? It was like something that you draw in like your in your book in your notebook as a kid. It was just like lines and lines of roping rights, every single one tubing, no one out. And we paddled out and it was like, we surfed that wave for like 3 days, surfed ourselves into pretzels. And it's like, at the end of it, you're so tired. You're just like barely able to paddle to catch a wave.
Yeah, that was
and then you're getting tubed. And like, I have a video on my phone of Grant getting like a 6-second barrel. Like between like he'd be like shooting all morning, put his camera down, go out, get like 10 tubes, and then like come back.
I was shooting 2 guys, and I'm shooting them. There's no one out, so they're getting every single set wave for like 3 hours swimming. And then like I started looking at the wind and I was like, I think the wind's going to turn. I'm pretty sure I've got this covered at this point, like I'm out there. So I like swam in, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to take a break. Like 3 hours of swimming is pretty good, And then sure enough, they were all tired. So they all came in and I'm paddling out, and it was like just me and like one other dude that lived there in the water, like all of a sudden you got it to yourself and the wind stayed good. And we got to surf for like another 3 hours, That's what I like love to experience on a trip, like that was cool. Like, and it was a mellow trip. It was like good crew of people. It wasn't like a grindy kind of trip. It was just like.
We booked the date, like we planned the trip without even looking at the swell, because the main point was to go into this village and hook them up with the water filters.
It wasn't about the surfing at all.
And we just like, I think like,
karma.
Yeah, John was saying something about it. He's like, it's the karma. Man.
He must score a lot then.
Probably.
He's like, damn, it's turning on over here.
Probably.
Do you guys have trips that you wish, at this point, that you wish you put under the surfer banner? Things you were thinking about a lot, like places you wanted to go, stories you wanted to tell?
I mean, you're getting pitched so much, it's almost hard to come up with your own ideas, because
what about an issue or something that's
probably something you can talk
about. I mean, I think that like we were just kind of starting to go down more of a path of like talking more about like social issues and like environmental issues, and I would have liked to have like kind of seen that through like a little further, especially with like everything that's going on with like climate change and the conversations that are happening about like what we can do as individuals to like offset that, but also like what we need to do to like hold people accountable who essentially make the rules for like the biggest polluters in the world. Mm-hmm. And like one of the stories that I wanted to talk about was like like I'm friends with Cyrus Sutton, and he used to be like a sponsored surfer, then became like a a documentary filmmaker. And then like now he's like a regenerative farmer in Washington. And it's like he's like kind of changed his whole life to be like about, having a positive impact on the land and like reconnecting with the land. Yep. And I was like, that's a crazy story that I think would be really inspiring to surfers. And so like that was like one story that I was like, I really want to like talk about the surf lifestyle, the ways that we don't think about that it can be like harmful to the world, and like ways to kind of like work around that,
But using examples like people like Cyrus to say, hey, like this is feasible, this is tangible, like you can love surfing, you can actually come from pro surfing, and you're so inspired to make a change that you're living it. There's a fair amount of surfers actually, like Cliff Capono is doing some radical stuff.
Heath Josky is probably another one that I would say in that category.
Dude, I used to do the amateur events with Heath.
He
freaking tears. Like the guy's psycho good surfer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that dovetails with like, what Sean Doherty has like helped make happen down in Australia, with like the protest movement there against, drilling in the Great Australian Bight, with which Heath Josky was a huge part of. I think he was like, he like went to Europe to like go get in some like oil executives' faces and stuff. And like, that's like, to me, like if you want to talk about like surfer or surf culture being counterculture, it's like, that's the best example of that, is like surfers standing up for the environment, standing up for like the coast and what they hold dear, and like really sticking it to the man. It's like
that's rad. That's simple. I never thought about that, and it's like it's a shrinking commodity, Mother Nature, and that is like you're a rebel if you're going and getting in there and like standing up for it.
Yeah, it's the sickest.
What do you think the future holds for that? Like how does that story that these people are, what they're doing for them, like, because they can't really rely on bigger publications at the moment to help share that, like,
I think they are finding bigger publications. Like I think they have networks now. I think like Surfer was definitely a very helpful stepping stone for a lot of those people. Like bigger media outlets would find things through Surfer magazine. Cool. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it gave that stepping stone into the mainstream an easier path, and now you don't have that stepping stone in the middle. Like you've got to figure out how to get to that top layer, But I feel like we've also kind of when I say we, I mean the surf world has grown into a place where people might be paying more attention to it anyway. I mean, I was flipping through like Amazon Prime the other day, and there was a documentary about surfing that never heard about, and the like title said something about how many surfers there were in the world and how big it was.
What?
And I never watched it. I need to go. I mean, like I don't know who would have made it. Like I don't know if you ever heard about something like that. But
no.
yeah, it's just like this. Somebody made a documentary that made it onto Amazon Prime, and it's about surfing in general. And I mean, I don't know what it's about exactly, but I need to go and look into that.
Get the Wavestorm generation in there.
I mean,
actually,
yeah.
there's like 4 trillion servers in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because I think that there are going to be new avenues that people are going to forge themselves for like how to get their stories out. I think that if you're like me and you really love like super in-depth like writing about the culture and, you know, travel and like all these different things, that's tough because there's just not going to be as much of that. You know, there's like Surfer's Journal, you know, there's a couple different surf websites, but it's like, you know, that's kind of all short form, snarky, you know, here for the clickbait kind of vibes. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't know, like, you know, that to me, that's like the biggest loss. But like, you know, there are definitely still going to be surfers like doing amazing things and finding ways to tell those stories.
But what happens next for Todd Berdanovich? Like, I mean, like, what are you on like a mission to start your own thing? Or do you see ever surfer coming back at all? Like what, because you have a fire inside of you for that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. There's been like this like whiplash of like, you know, kind of accepting the fact that Surfer was done and then immediately getting hit up by like dozens of people wanting to buy it. And like, I don't know, like, you know, how sincere those offers are going to end up being, and like, you know, who knows, like we'll see what happens to Surfer. I personally think that Surfer is like such like a beloved thing that I'd be surprised if it actually did disappear forever. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe there's a revival down the road. But like for me personally, like, I mean, I've like been grinding at this for like 10 years. So I'm going to go down to Baja. I'm going to go surf. I'm going to surf every goddamn day, have a bunch of fun. And then after like a month of that, 2 months of that, I'm going to like, you know, kind of give it like a honest appraisal of like what I want to do. Like, cause I think it's funny, like we all love surfing so much. We'll always do that. But then like, as far as like what we want to do with like our career paths, you know, it's like the kind of stuff that I want to do, like maybe I'll end up working for a nonprofit or like doing something that helps like my immediate community in San Diego.
Yep.
But like, to me, it's like Surfer was like insanely fun and such like an educational experience. But like, I think like everyone hits a point in their lives where they're like, I want to make sure I'm doing something positive for like the world around me. So yeah.
I've been watching Litmus a lot. And it's really interesting because that Wayne Lynch interview where he's in the teepee, it's like by the fire, and he's talking about surfers as they get older, surfing needs to grow, but the older surfers need to put back into the community of surfing. I think it's sick because like obviously you guys are bright examples of creating something, be it a magazine, that gives to the culture of surfing. And I just think maybe I respect that we're having this conversation now because I hope that people keep putting back into it. It seems like surfing is like spreading out really hard, and if you have a side of surfing that you love, like then celebrate it in a way that other people can feel it inclusive and it, you know, resonates through those other people. So I hope something comes back from it because I like long format surf content as well. And even if it's a small amount of people, there's still people, and you never know what kind of an effect that can have in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, like, because it ends up creating its own community, you know? It's like, there's the broader surf culture, but then there's the culture of Surfer Magazine. And like, you know, that's how like we got connected and we got to tell the stories that we got to tell. And, you know, so that becomes its own little ecosystem, which is just like so damn cool. And like, yeah, you hope that there's going to be more of those for the culture, you know?
G, you got any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, my hope is, you know, Surfer, like, it's had such a presence, and it's been around for so long and it's meant so much to people, that my hope is that this gives it the opportunity to actually like maybe kind of get separated from that sort of corporate like like group that it was in, and that somebody like maybe has the opportunity now to like buy it privately, that cares about it and wants to preserve its true sort of like spirit, you know, and that's kind of my hope, you know. And I think Todd's had some conversations about that sort of stuff. I know when I kind of left a year ago from the full-time position, I definitely got a lot of feedback from people and questions from people about that, you know, because that was kind of the first wave of like people getting let go and whatever. And so there's people out there looking at it. Financially, I don't know how much sense it makes. You have to really love it and understand what the type of surfer that wants it to survive, you know what I mean? And cater to them, but also like, you know, use it for these like positive things. And, you know, I think there's still kind of hope for it. Like, I don't think it's going away completely, you know? I mean, I think anyone that's as passionate about surfing is whether Surfer Magazine exists or doesn't exist, they're stoked anyway, you know, like it's
and they're
not
still
like,
trying to spread surf.
yeah, and it's gonna find its way, like, but it would be cool if that happened at some point, you know.
I just feel like if the Washington Post can have like Jeff Bezos, then like why can't Surfer Magazine have like Jimmy Buffett, you know?
Dude,
Just some
Just
some billionaire who's just like, you know what, this seems fun.
Yeah.
Buy
This
this
is kind
thing.
of a cool mag.
Yeah.
Guys,
Yeah,
should I buy it? That would be so sick. Well, hopefully. Well, thank you guys anyways for coming over to my garage.
Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah.
It's been
That's
good.
awesome.